The Veldt by Ray Bradbury, adapted by Miss Motter. George, I wish you'd look at the playroom. What's wrong with it? I don't know. Well, then, I just want you to look at it is all, or call a therapist in to look at it. Why would a therapist look at our playroom? You know very well what he'd do. His wife paused in the middle of the kitchen and watched the automatic stove making supper for 4. It's just that the playroom is different now than it was. All right, let's have a look. They walked down the hall of their soundproofed Happy Life home, which had cost them $30,000 installed. This fully automatic house, which clothed and fed and rocked them to sleep, and played and sang and was good to them. Their approach triggered a switch somewhere, and the playroom light flicked on when they came within 10 feet of it. Similarly, behind them, in the hall's lights went off and on as they left them behind. Well, said George Hadley. They stood on the floor of the playroom. It was 40 feet across by 40 feet long and 30 feet high. It had cost them half again as much as the rest of the house. But nothing's too good for our children, George had said. The playroom was silent. It was empty, and the walls were blank. Now, as George and Lydia Hadley stepped further into the room, the walls appeared to move away into the distance. Then an African veldt appeared. A yellow grassland stretched as far as the eye could see, on all sides, in full color down to the littlest details, like the pebbles and bits of straw. The ceiling above them became a deep sky with a hot, yellow sun. George Hadley felt sweat start to trickle down his eyebrow. Let's get out of this sun, he said. This is a little too real. But I don't see anything wrong. Wait a moment. You'll see, said his wife. Now the hidden odorophonics started to blow smells at the 2 people in the middle of the hot grassland. The straw smell of lying grass, the smell of a hidden water hole, the smell of animals, the smell of dust in the hot air. And now the sounds, the thump of distant antelope feet on the grass, the rustling of vultures. A vulture's shadow passed through the sky. The shadow flickered on George Hadley's upturned, sweating face. Filthy creatures, he heard his wife say, the vultures. You see, there are the lions far over that way, Lydia said, pointing. Now they're on their way to the water hole. They've just been eating. I don't know what. Some animal. George Hadley put his hand up to shield off the burning light from his squinted eyes. A zebra, or a baby giraffe, maybe. Are you sure? His wife sounded especially tense. No, it's a little late to be sure, he said, amused. Nothing over there I can see but cleaned bone, and the vultures dropping for what's left. Did you hear that scream? She asked. No, George answered. About a minute ago? Sorry, no. The lions were coming, and again George Hadley was filled with admiration for the genius who had invented the playroom. A miracle selling one for an absurdly low price. Every home should have one. Oh, occasionally the playroom's holograms frightened you with their accuracy, but most of the time, what fun for everyone, not only your own son and daughter, but for yourself when you felt like a quick getaway to a foreign land. Well, here it was, and here were the lions now 15 feet away, so real, so startlingly real that you could feel the prickling fur on your hand, and your mouth was filled with their dusty smell. Their bodies so yellow it reminded you of a fancy gold painting. The yellows of lions and summer grass, and the sound of the lions breathing in and out, and the smell of meat from their panting, dripping mouths. The lions stood looking at George and Lydia Hadley with terrible green-yellow eyes. "Watch out!" Lydia screamed. The lions came running at them. Lydia bolted and ran. Instinctively, George ran after her. Outside in the hall with the door slammed, he was laughing, and she was crying, and they both stood shocked at the other's reaction. "George!" "Lydia, my poor, dear, sweet Lydia, they almost got us." "Walls, Lydia. Remember walls and holograms. That's all they are. Oh, they look real, I must admit, lions and the grassland. But it's all lights, crystals, and film. It's all odorophonics and sound effects, Lydia." "I'm afraid." She came to him and put her body against him and cried, "Did you see? Did you feel? It's too real. Now, Lydia, you've got to tell the children not to read any more on Africa." Of course, he patted her. "Promise?" "Sure. And lock the playroom for a few days until I get my nerves settled." You know how difficult Peter is about that. When I punished him a month ago by locking the playroom for even a few hours, the tantrum he threw, and Wendy too, they live for the playroom. It's got to be locked. That's all there is to it. All right. Reluctantly, he locked the huge door. You've been working too hard. You need a rest. I don't know, she said, blowing her nose and sitting in a chair that immediately began to rock and comfort her. Maybe I don't have enough to do. Maybe I have time to think too much. Why don't we shut the whole house off for a few days and take a vacation? You mean you want me to fry eggs instead of letting the house do it? Yes, she nodded. And sew the holes in my socks? Yes, Lydia nodded her head frantically. And vacuum the house on your own? Yes, yes, yes! But I thought that's why we bought this fully automated house, so we wouldn't have to do anything, and the house would just do it for us. Well, that's just it. I feel like I don't belong here. The house as wife and mother now and nanny. How can I compete? How can I make an imaginary African Veldt? Can I give a bath and scrub the children as well as the automatic scrub bath can? I cannot. And it isn't just me, it's you. You've been awfully nervous lately. Well, I suppose I have been smoking too much. You look as if you didn't know what to do with yourself in this house either. You smoke a little more every morning and drink a little more every night, and you need a little more sedative every night. You're beginning to feel unnecessary too. Am I? He paused and tried to feel into himself to see what was really there. Oh, George! She looked beyond him at the playroom door. Those lions can't get out of there, can they? He looked at the door and saw it tremble, as if something had jumped against it from the other side. Of course not, he said. At dinner they ate alone, for Wendy and Peter were at a special carnival across town and had messaged home to say they'd be late. Go ahead and eat. So George Hadley, amused, sat watching the fully automatic dining room table. The table produced warm dishes of food from its mechanical interior. We forgot the ketchup, he said. Sorry, said a small voice within the table, and the ketchup appeared. As for the playroom, thought George Hadley, it won't hurt for the children to be locked out of it a while. Too much of anything isn't good for anyone. And it was obvious that the children had been spending a little too much time using the room to play in Africa. That sun! He could still feel it on his neck, still like a hot paw. And the lions! And the smell of blood! Remarkable how the playroom could recreate whatever the children imagined or desired. The children thought lions, and there were lions. The children thought zebras, and there were zebras. Sun, sun. Giraffes, giraffe. Death, and death. That last! He chewed on the meat that the table had cut for him. Death thoughts. They were awfully young, Wendy and Peter, for death thoughts. Or no, you were never too young, really. Long before you knew what death was, you were wishing it on someone else. When you were 2 years old, you were shooting people with toy guns. But this, the long, hot African Veldt, the awful death in the jaws of a lion, and repeated again and again. Where are you going? He didn't answer Lydia. Preoccupied, he let the lights turn on and off as he walked to the playroom door. He listened against it. Far away, a lion roared. He unlocked the door and opened it. Just before he stepped inside, he heard a faraway scream, and then another roar from the lions, which grew quiet quickly. He stepped into Africa. How many times in the last year had he opened this door and found Alice in Wonderland, or Aladdin and his magical lamp, or the cow jumping over a real-looking moon? They were all delightful make-believe worlds. How often had he seen Pegasus flying in the sky ceiling, or seen fountains of red fireworks, or heard angel voices singing. But now it is yellow, hot Africa, this baking hot oven with death. Perhaps Lydia was right. Perhaps the children needed a little vacation from their fantasy, which was growing a bit too real for 10-year-olds. It was all right to use the playroom for a variety of fantasies, but when the child's mind settled on one fantasy, it seemed that, for the past month, he had heard lions roaring and smelled their strong odor as far away as his study door. But, being busy, he had paid it no attention. George Hadley stood on the African grassland alone. The lions looked up from their feeding, watching him. The only flaw to the illusion was the open door through which he could see his wife, far down the dark hall, like a framed picture eating her dinner. Go away, he said to the lions. They did not go. He knew the way the room worked. You sent out your thoughts. Whatever you thought would appear. Let's have Aladdin and his lamp, he snapped. The Veldt remained. The lions remained. Come on, room. I demand Aladdin, he said. Nothing happened. The lions mumbled in their hot, furry bodies. Aladdin! He went back to dinner. "The full room's out of order," he said. "It won't respond to my thoughts or commands." "Or," Lydia started. "Or what?" "Or it can't respond," said Lydia, "because the children have thought about Africa and lions and killing so many days that the room is in a rut." "Could be." "Or Peter set it to remain that way." "Set it? He may have got into the machinery and fixed something." "Peter doesn't know machinery." "He's a wise one for 10. That IQ of his." "Nevertheless." "Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad." The Hadleys turned. Wendy and Peter were coming in the front door, rosy cheeks and bright blue eyes. They smelled of ozone on their clothes from their trip in the helicopter. "You're just in time for supper," said both parents. "We're full of strawberry ice cream and hot dogs," said the children, holding hands. "But we'll sit and watch." "Yes, come tell us about the playroom," said George Hadley. The brother and sister blinked at him, and then at each other. "Playroom?" they both answered at the same time. "All about Africa and everything," said the father, with a fake friendliness. "I don't understand," said Peter. "Your mother and I were just traveling through Africa," said George Hadley. "There is no Africa in the playroom," said Peter simply. "Oh, come now, Peter, we know better." "I don't remember any Africa," said Peter to Wendy. "Do you?" "No," Wendy answered. "Run, see, and come tell," Peter ordered Wendy. She obeyed. "Wendy, come back here," said George Hadley, but she was gone. The house lights followed her like a flock of fireflies. Too late, he realized he had forgotten to lock the playroom door after his last look. "Wendy'll come tell us," said Peter. "She doesn't have to tell me. I've seen it." "I'm sure you're mistaken, Father." "I'm not, Peter. Come along now." But Wendy was back. "It's not Africa," she said breathlessly. "We'll see about this," said George Hadley, and they all walked down the hall together and opened the playroom door. There was a green, lovely forest, a lovely river, a purple mountain, high voices singing, and colorful flights of butterflies. The African veldt was gone. The lions were gone. Only the butterflies were here now, so beautiful that it brought tears to your eyes. George Hadley looked at the changed scene. "Go to bed," he said to the children. They opened their mouths. "You heard me," he said. They went off to their bedrooms. George Hadley walked through the singing glade and picked up something that lay in the corner near where the lions had been. He walked slowly back to his wife. "What is that?" she asked. "An old wallet of mine," he said. He showed it to her. The smell of hot grass was on it, and the smell of a lion. There were drops of saliva on it. It had been chewed, and there were blood smears on both sides. He closed the playroom door and locked it tight. In the middle of the night he was still awake, and he knew his wife was awake. "Do you think Wendy changed it?" she said, at last in the dark room. "Of course. Made it from a veldt into a forest and put butterflies there instead of lions." "Yes." "Why?" Lydia wondered aloud. "I don't know, but it's staying locked until I find out." "How did your wallet get there?" "I don't know anything," he said, "except that I'm beginning to be very sorry we bought that room for the children. If children are mentally unstable at all, a room like that, it's supposed to help them in a healthy way. I'm starting to wonder." He stared at the ceiling. "We've given the children everything they ever wanted. Is this our reward? Secrecy? Disobedience? Who was it said, children are carpets, they should be stepped on occasionally? We've never lifted a hand. They're insufferable. Let's admit it. They come and go when they like. They treat us as if we were the children. They're spoiled, and we're spoiled. They've been acting funny ever since you told them they couldn't go to New York a few months ago. They're not old enough to do that alone. I explained. Nevertheless, I've noticed they've been acting toward us differently since then. I think I'll have David McLean come tomorrow to have a look at the playroom, at Africa. But it's not Africa now. It's a lovely forest. I have a feeling it'll be Africa again before then." A moment later they heard the screams. 2 screams. 2 people screaming from downstairs. And then a roar of lions. "Wendy and Peter aren't in their room," said his wife. He lay in his bed with his beating heart. "No," he said, "they've broken into the playroom." "Those screams, they sound familiar." "Do they?" "Yes, awfully. And although their automated beds tried very hard, the 2 adults couldn't be rocked to sleep for another hour. The smell of cats was in the night